Welcome, everyone. And today's class is going to be an interesting one, and it's going to be a little bit more actually statistics than everything else. But I'm going to do one of my very first initial analysis into how filling up the max meter works and how we can optimize the max meter overall. And so far, I've only got Lapras data, but I will be doing this for Latias and Latios this weekend as well. So for today, the 25th of July, here's our 6-star GMAX battle analysis. All right, I'm going to go over this to the best of my ability. And one of my backgrounds is I'm an engineer, so I always kind of try to talk about when I do this type of things what we're covering and how we covered it. So we're going to cover the understanding. Don't have everything solved right now, obviously, because I only had about an hour to do all of these, but how the max meter is filled at the gigantamax scale. So what we looked at for this was the attack speed. So we did 0.5 seconds and 1 second attacks. Didn't care about if they were strong, neutral, resistant. We were only looking at attack speed. We are also looking at using or not using charge moves during the attack. So we've always had this feeling that the 0.5 seconds attacks without using the charge moves were the optimal way to fill the max meter. And honestly, that is correct. But I wanted to try to go into more deeper analysis, and it is relatively limited because, once again, it's just me, and I'm trying to do this in the most controlled way possible. Looking at how we kind of did this, does stats really mean anything to the max meter? And I learned something else that I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So what is not covered right now? So did not have a chance to do effective and not effective attacks. How it affects the max meter. Anything at the 5-star dynamax level, that's going to be for the next analysis, which I do plan on spending way too much time on over the weekend. And how much overall damage during the normal phase we've done. Lapras just has way too much HP, and like Chansey barely moved the HP meter. And a few others also did because they fainted a little too quickly. But I will try to give some meaningful trends, but there won't be statistics behind it because this is just going to be more of what I kind of saw through the videos. So how in the world did I get this initial data? And no, I do not have the ability to go into the game files and understand all the numbers, etc., etc. So instead, I'm going through the overall battles. And so I attacked with a single Pokemon against Lapras. Each one of these is going to be a single one trying to go to their max move. And if the Pokemon fainted, shock alert, a lot of them did. I estimated how much of the max meter was filled via an angle, which I could measure using a program called GIMP, where I basically took a screenshot of the very last frame before the Pokemon was fainting. And with that, we were able to measure the angle, assuming 180 degrees, and using that angle to determine how much of that max meter was left. And with that, multiplied by the time total frames overall, and to get the total frames that would have been taken overall. It's not perfect, but it is the best that I can do without having an quote-unquote invincibility mode or something like that. So what we did is we started counting the frames when the very first attack appeared on the screen. You can actually see that frame, you keep tapping and then you'll see a little circle tap that purple or pink like particle is going to there. Once I saw that little circle at the very bottom, that's when I started counting the frames, and I stopped counting frames the frame before transformation. So using that, these battles were all done from the same power spot. They were completed within the same hour, so we had 2 spawns total. Between the time it took me to solo get to the max meter or solo faint, I really only had a chance to do roughly 15 total runs. So why am I using frames as a timing metric? Because it is the best way for the software that I use, Vegas Pro 21. to count the exact time. Vegas Pro has a little bit of a weird rounding error because I have a 29.97 frame per second rate. And instead, if I used frames, then I could just divide the amount of frames by 29.97 to get the actual timing, which is what I did. And that's how I am going to do the analysis. It's still giving you in seconds, but if you multiply the numbers that I give by 29.97, you will get the frames that I used or was taken from. And that's how we got all these metrics. So let's start basic. And basically, I started with Zamazenta and did a standardization. Why am I going to do this? For me, this was the only real run where I was able to not get any feints with Zamazenta. I could have done it with Blissey as well, but I just ran out of time. That was my plan with the 16th and 17th runs, but unfortunately did not have the time to do so. And so for the overall timing, for the frames was only 35.2, and considering that I was dealing with a lot of frames overall, that was really, really good overall. So what's the standard deviation? It's basically the variation that we expect between, for here it's 3 runs. I'm not going to give you the calculations. It is something that can be done fairly simply. Also can be done by lots of programs as well. I'm using a very specific program called Jump JMP, and you'll see the graphs with some of this as well there. They've all been made through JMP. They're the software that I use for most of my work that I do outside of YouTube and other stuff. And so, just in general, if we get something that's above 3 standard deviations, even with limited data sets here, we can definitely tell it is different sets of data. 3 standard deviations is usually good enough in engineering terms to say, ooh, these are operating differently than these. So, knowing what the standard deviation is, and for Zamazenta was 1.17 seconds, that's primarily with the first attack. I do believe that first run I actually slowed down a little bit, and if I do it next time, it might even be tighter. But that's just the way that I felt for that. The real reasons for these differences are completely unknown. Could be slight stat differences between each fights. There's also a little bit of animations on how often you are hit. So with all that, these all kind of play into play. So the mean timing was 49.8 seconds. The mean is the average. And so it's basically run 3 was pretty much the mean at 1489 frames or 49.7 seconds. And, for a lot of the battles, this feels pretty correct. And you're going, man, 49.7 seconds is a real long time. If you assume your team has 4 trainers total and they were all using Zamazenta with the 0.5 second move, yada, 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 not doing any charge attacks and just tapping as quickly as you can without dodging even, it would be about 12.5 seconds between each transformation shifts, minus the animations, of course. So the animations take a couple of seconds as well. And so it's usually you can, between, if you guys do everything pretty quickly, it's about 45 seconds between beginning of the fight, finishing your max meter, getting your animations complete, and then doing your 3 transformation attacks if everybody's on the ball. Not all trainers will be on the ball, and obviously it could take a little longer. But the first part, it usually does take about 12 to 15 seconds for most teams that I know. So that just felt pretty correct. It actually felt a little faster than I was expecting. All right, so we're going to do the overall 0.5 second analysis and also taking a look at attack power. So Zacian has the most attack power. Zamazenta has the second, Blissey has the third. CP is a real easy way to identify, on average, which Pokemon have the highest attack power, as it's mostly, the CP is 2 times more affected by attack than it is by defense or HP. And so with that, what was interesting that we saw at 0.5 seconds, the average time, Zamazenta was by far the fastest at 49.8. Blissey only had 1 run, so it's right at 51 seconds. And Zacian was at 52.3 with the feint. So anything that is in red, I did have a feint. The feint was barely before it finished, which actually annoyed me. I was hoping I would be able to just eke it out. And so that might drive it up a little bit. But if we go by the standard deviation rule, Zamazenta and Blissey are separated by just over 1.2 standard deviations, and Zacian is about 2.3 standard deviations differently than Zamazenta. That is not really enough to say, wow, there's a major difference. But I do believe, and this is more going to kind of be a spoiler for the 1 second, but I do believe animations actually, unfortunately, play a role. So it's the animation timing that plays the biggest, I think, role compared all of the fast types at the 0.5 seconds. And that is going to be key. Zamazenta has one of the quickest, if not the quickest, animation that I can remember for the Dynamax or Gigantamax Pokemon that we have right now. Blissey's is closer to Zamazenta's and Zacian. Zacian does have a relatively, and I'm going to put it in air quotes, slow animation. And so I do think the dragging of Zacian is actually real. And the difference between four trainers is about 0.5 to 1 second for the difference between Zacian and actually for Zamazenta and Blissey is about 0.3 seconds. And between Zamazenta and Zacian is closer to the 0.7 seconds. That 0.7 seconds might be the difference between one or two attacks. And so, from a defense standpoint, it's not really large. But if overall, if Zamazenta is going to have a better defensive standpoint, I'd rather fill up the max meter faster than do slightly more damage, which Zacian did do. Blissey's damage is part of the reason why I couldn't do this analysis. It was so meaningfully small that I just couldn't really measure it. I will do that when we go for the 5-star videos next time, though. So here is more of a graphical form. You can just see that the ones in orange is Zacian, the ones in that lightish greenish blue is Zamazenta, and the ones in blue is Blissey. And as I say, Zamazenta, difference between Zamazenta and Zamazenta, Zacian and Zamazenta, sorry, is 2.13 standard deviations, which is not quite 3 standard deviations in total. And we did have that little bit of the difference there because of the feint. But still, to me, it does feel like there is a difference, at least for how quickly, for the fast moves, filling up that max meter. I do think that Zamazenta is the better one. Blissey is a little better than Zacian, and Zacian was the slowest of the three. But that is also me going there, and that's not pure statistical fact. So I'm not going to put that as one of my statements yet when I go to the conclusions at the very end here. All right, we're going to now do Zamazenta analysis with charged attacks, and this one is a lot different. So on the top here is the exact same information that you saw before. And on the bottom of the chart here, I did 3 runs with charge moves. Obviously, these moves were Behemoth Bash because it's the only way that, you can actually use this Zamazenta. And it's still using the 0.5 seconds, and I was using the Behemoth Bash as quickly as I could throughout each attack. The biggest difference here is Zamazenta in the second run did feint, and I think it actually finished with the Behemoth Bash, then it fainted, and so it actually kind of made it go a little faster because of it. And we usually get that delay, and it's usually about a second and a half before we can do attack, which is about 2 attacks overall. But mean timing here was 58 seconds versus 49.8 seconds. And if we do the quick math, it's about 7 standard deviations. And with Lean Six Sigma knowledge, and I'm not going to bore you with all the math, but that is 99.99% sure that that is completely different when you're 7 standard deviations off. And I actually think I dropped a couple of 9s off there. So it is pretty much statistically determined here that running charged moves does do you more damage, but at a cost of spending a lot longer to fill up your max meter. And your max meter damage is by far more important than anything you're going to do in the non-transformation form. If you want to use your charge move, you probably should only use it once, and that's right at the end to kind of just spam a little bit more damage overall. But in general, it's better just to spam fast attacks only versus charged moves. Now we're going to do with Zacian charge attacks. Zacian here, we had the top once again, and the bottom, Zacian actually fainted 2 out of the 3 times against Lapras. On the 3rd time, Lapras was really spamming the worst attack overall. And once again, Zacian at the last one spammed at the very end. It's charged Behemoth Blade, and so it probably did alter it overall. I will say that the range here of difference in time for Zacian is much greater. And once again, that's more due to, I don't know if there's like an optimal way to input with the charge moves versus the fast types afterwards. But I seem to get some really, really weird delays in both. And the one time that Zacian actually made it all the way through, it was using its dragon attack, which Zacian just laughed at. But it did take 65.2 seconds instead of the 60.4 and the 55.5. So if we look at the 2 mean timings here, we have 53.5 and 60.4. Standard deviation, that the one that I feel most comfortable with at least the fast attacks, is still using Zamazenta's because Zacian did have this feint. And the difference here is the mean timing for the no charge is 53.5 and charge is 60.4. 7 seconds, or about 6 sigma different here. And once again, statistically, this is very much a different subset. I could do F values and so forth there, but without a great deal more data, it would be a little harder to run those type of tests. For the statistics that I do have here, I do feel very confident stating that both Zacian and Zamazenta, the charge moves does take a lot longer to fill your max meter. Now, 7 seconds over 4 trainers is just about 2 seconds. Same with Zamazenta is about 2.5 seconds. But that, once again, is the difference between avoiding an attack and taking an extra attack. And honestly, that is usually what's driving communities under, are just taking more attacks than they need to. If communities could just stick with just attacking with 0.5 seconds for the most part, that would be key. All right. Now, if I'm just taking a look at Zacian versus Zamazenta analysis with charge attacks, I do see a pretty difference here. And with Behemoth Blade and Behemoth Bash, the timing and especially of the animation, you could definitely tell that there is a pretty large difference. And animation is actually more important than stats, and animation length, more specifically, at least in my mind, determines more about how fast you can fill your max meter than anything else, other than obviously your fast type attack, which we'll talk about after this 0.5 second analysis with and without charged. You could just see the absolute differences here, and this is pretty massive just in general, but you could easily see the huge differences. As you could see, basically, the not using any charged moves, only once did Zacian take longer than using the moves, and that was with Zamazenta at its fastest. So all in all, I think I can honestly say that if you want to fill up your max meter the fastest, which is by far the most optimal, please do not use charged attacks while attacking. Finally, we're going to take a look at the 1 second attack analysis, and you could see that the timing is almost more than double, which is surprising. But there's a caveat here. Moltres took much longer than Rillaboom and Metagross because Moltres' animation so much longer, and that really slowed it down. So if we take the average of only Rillaboom and Metagross, it's 97.5 seconds. It's not quite double the length. So we do know that there's probably some type of power and minimum scaling here, but I just don't have enough information to really fill out everything. Adding charge moves to the 1 second fast type if you look at the Rillaboom. And yes, they all fainted because they were just taking way too much damage. And you were looking at roughly 30 seconds difference for Rillaboom. That's going from a 1 second to a grass knot move for the 1 second attack. They were both using grass, and honestly, this is just not worth overall, but they were doing some pretty good damage. But once again, that damage is meaningless compared to what you can do in transformation on top of the damage mitigation you do while you're transforming, because you reset that timer. So looking at this graph here, you can take a look at on the left-hand side is not using charge attacks, and then using on the right side using charge attacks, and you just see the difference between 0.5 seconds and 1 second. It is absolutely massive. It's not quite doubling the time, and as I say, I think it's Moltres that kind of makes it look like it's doubling. Uh, it's around 51 seconds versus 97 seconds. It's not quite doubling the time, but it's still nearly that much. And that is just absolutely a death trap for most trainers in general. So for future tests, we're going to be looking at 5-star battles and testing how the max meter fills. With 5-star, the HP is going to be much lower, so I should be able to do a damage analysis. So we're going to be doing Latias and Latios, and I'm going to be trying to do as much as I can. I hopefully will do about 60 to 70 battles, maybe more. And if I do, that will allow me to do a lot more nerdy stat stuff for everybody to get a better idea of what's going on. And another thing that we will do is definitely see how resistance affect the max meter, if at all. And that's something I really want to see as well. If that is the case, then it may change some of the suggestions that I have for future damage. And if it doesn't, I may just then completely ignore, and we'll be using all this data for all the future stuff. So just to quickly go through this, 0.5 seconds is attack is so much better at filling up the max meter than anything else, and only using the 0.5 seconds. It was really hard with the limited runs to see if Zacian, Zamazenta, and Blissey were different. I feel comfortable in saying that Zamazenta fills up the max meter slightly faster than Zacian, and I think Blissey is kind of in between the two. Maybe Blissey is closer to Zacian than Zamazenta, but I need more data analysis in order to really get a much more solid than I feel. And so I do apologize, but once again, I wasn't able to run all of these analysis while I was attacking to change my plan, and I just ran out of time to get a little bit more Blissey attacks in. It is definite, though, that attack power does not change the filling max meter, but it does do a lot more damage, and it's animation time that definitely, to me, feels like it's the main drive. Only doing fast attacks fills the max meter so much quickly. And finally, those fancy animations are really cool looking. Honestly, I love seeing them. But really, that is the big surprise that I found with the limited amount of attacks I was able to do. With that, that's all I've got with this. I really hope you enjoyed this. If you like this, please like and subscribe. You can also catch me on twitch.tv/mattguru. And also, if you want to be part of my community, please, that would be awesome. And if you are joined with a subscription, you can also be a part of my friends list and join me on battles when I do battles every weekend at the very least, and usually during the weekdays as well. With that, I do need to get class to be dismissed, but as always, I promise to do better next time. Thank you very much and have a great day.